This is one of my favorite topics that I've covered in the past. New house stories in which unsuspecting people who just moved into their new homes discover something or perhaps someone that shouldn't be there. But before getting into those, I want to thank DraftKings for sponsoring this video. DraftKings is an online, real money casino that lets you play whenever and wherever legally permitted. Choose from over 300 real money games, slots, blackjack, roulette, and live dealer games. With more real money games added regularly, DraftKings Casino is changing the game with new ways to play. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable, and if it's not yet available in your state, check out DraftKings Daily Fantasy app, where you have a shot at winning cash prizes all season long. Head to the DraftKings Casino app right now and sign up using promo code Mr. Nightmare, and when you play just $10, you'll instantly receive $100 in casino credits. This happened a few years ago, but it still gives me an unsettling feeling whenever I think about it. The only reason I'm talking about it now is because I feel like it's been long enough since it happened, and I won't risk anything by putting it on the internet. Back then, my wife and I had just moved into the suburbs from the city. We just had our third kid, and between the baby stuff, the toys, and the general chaos, our apartment felt way too cramped. We found a nice house in a quiet, safe neighborhood. The neighbors described it as the kind of place where you'd feel fine leaving the doors unlocked. The house itself wasn't massive, but it was definitely a step up from the tiny space we'd previously been living in. One of the features that caught my wife's eye was the backyard. It had this beautiful, slightly overgrown garden with a few old statues scattered around. They were weathered, a little eerie looking, like something out of Game of Thrones. I know it sounds weird, but my wife and I loved it, said it gave our yard character. I was pretty indifferent, so I left everything as it was, statues and all. I figured it was less work for me, which I was never going to complain about. A few days after we moved in, I was looking out the window, taking in the yard, when I noticed something odd. One of the statues, an angel I think, was facing away from the house. All the others were facing toward us, so it looked strange. I could have sworn they all faced the same direction, but I didn't really know for sure. I didn't think much of it, and just assumed I was misremembering things. The next morning, I looked out the window again, and that's when I noticed it. Another statue had turned around, again facing away from the house. This time I knew something was up. I had never been more sure about anything in my life. I asked my wife about it, but she just shrugged it off and said she hadn't noticed anything. I thought maybe it was my son Jimmy. He was a little prankster back then, always up to something. But when I asked him, he just looked at me like I was nuts. I doubted he'd do something like that anyway. I knew something was going on though, but I couldn't prove it. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I tried to ignore it. Besides, I had bigger problems to worry about. I don't like admitting it, but money was really tight during that time, and I lived in perpetual fear that I was going to lose my job. A few days went by without anything strange, and I started to relax. But then, one evening, I looked out the window, and my heart nearly stopped. All of the statues were lined up in a row at the very edge of the house, just standing there. It was a freakish sight, like something out of a horror movie. I know it sounds ridiculous, but part of me could feel all those eyes looking at me. My breathing went shallow. I couldn't decide whether it was more scary or bizarre. I went outside to get a closer look, trying to make sense of it. Before opening up the back door, I took a few nervous glances around the yard to make sure there was no one out there. It was daylight, but I was paranoid. Eventually, I worked up the courage to open the door and go inspect the statues. I went to lift one of them and immediately realized something. Those statues were heavy, way too heavy for one person to move alone. I couldn't even budge one of them on my own. As I was debating what to do, my wife came outside, and the look on her face told me she was just as freaked out as I was. She suggested maybe some of the other neighbors were messing with us, trying to scare the new people on the block, but that explanation literally made no sense. We had met all of the neighbors, and they all seemed like fairly normal people. Plus, I had trouble believing that anyone sane would do this to a family with young children. This was harassment, not some harmless prank. We ended up calling the police, but as you might expect, they couldn't do much. They suggested putting up some security cameras, but we didn't have the money for that. I told the cops we would, but on the inside, I was really reluctant to do something so drastic. They left, and I guess I felt a little better, even though my wife was still extremely shaken up. My wife and I did everything we could to hide the situation from our kids. Say what you will, but we didn't want to scare them. Nothing happened the next day, or the next. I speculated that the cops had scared whoever was there away, which did track on many levels. So we tried to forget about it, even though neither of us really felt comfortable. I tried to assure myself that maybe my wife was right. Maybe it had just been a prank or something. That didn't do anything to calm my nerves, though. I was on edge, looking out the windows every time I passed by, half expecting to see the statues somewhere else. I hope no one ever has to experience the sensation of feeling unsafe in your own home. A few days passed without incident. I started thinking the nightmare was over, and for the first time in a while, the house was actually starting to feel like home. I could not have been more wrong. It was a weekend. I don't remember whether it was Saturday or Sunday, but it was definitely a weekend since my kids didn't have school. After some breakfast, I went outside to play in the yard with my kids, and that's when I saw it. Spray painted in big black letters on the back wall of our house were the words, "Go away." I nearly dropped my son when I saw it. Without thinking, I rushed my kids inside and told my wife to stay in the house with them. I don't know what came over me. I'm not that brave of a guy, but I started sprinting through the garden, screaming threats at whoever had vandalized my house. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins, and I was looking for a fight. No one was anywhere in my yard, though. Eventually, I gave up looking. As I was walking back towards the house, the adrenaline in me turned to outright fear. This was serious. Someone had left a direct message meant to scare us. They could have meant us harm, and I knew the situation was only going to escalate from there. The police came again and took down another report, but without any leads, there wasn't much they could do. I insisted that they stay on the property in case those people came back, but they told me they didn't have enough evidence to waste resources like that. As far as they knew, some teenage delinquents could have been behind the graffiti. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They told me they'd make sure a patrol officer was nearby, which I guess was some kind of consolation. My wife was twice as upset as I was, so I reassured her that we'd be okay, even though I was freaking out internally. That night, I was in the kitchen when I heard my wife scream from the living room. I ran in, and she was standing by the window pointing outside. I looked, and my stomach dropped. There were 5 people standing in our backyard, each of them wearing white face coverings. They were dancing around in this strange, jerky way, almost like puppets. We just stood there, watching them, too shocked to move. It was terrifying. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish, but it was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. I snapped out of my haze and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife we had. I basically screamed at my wife to call the police, and while she was doing that, I ran out the back door with a knife in my hand. I screamed like a clinically insane person and took one step toward them before instantly regretting it. There were 5 of them and 1 of me. They could have been armed. Before anything else could happen, I turned and ran back inside the house like a coward. The knife must have scared them though, because they stopped dancing and ran into the garden, out of sight. I told my wife to run upstairs, find the kids, and hide, and I guarded the back door in case they tried to break in. By the time the police arrived, those people were gone. The police did a thorough search but couldn't find any trace of them. That was the last straw. I didn't care about the costs. I bought and installed security cameras the next day. My wife was hysterical for weeks after that, begging me to let us move somewhere else. I told her that if one more thing happens, that we would, but that we'd probably be screwing ourselves financially if it came to that. Luckily, the cameras must have done the trick, because those people never returned, and we never had another incident occur on the property. The scariest thing, though, is that we still live in the same house and never got an explanation for what happened. My wife Taylor and I recently moved out of our old home. She didn't like being so close to her family and wanted to put some distance between us and them, so that's what we did. We don't have kids, and she stopped working ages ago, so she was relatively amenable to my suggestions about where to move. I'm an electrician, so bouncing around isn't much of a problem for me. we eventually settled on New Mexico. We'd both been rural people all our lives, so it wasn't that drastic of a lifestyle change. That was about 3 months ago, give or take. We found a fantastic deal on a place way out in the country. The house is honestly bigger than we really need, especially since it's just the two of us and our black lab Lola. But honestly, we figured we'd make use out of the extra space, maybe even host some of the friends we'd make. We'd been settled in for a few months when I started noticing something odd. The upstairs lights kept tripping circuits, but the rest of the house would still have power. After this happened once or twice, I knew exactly what the problem was. Like I said, I'm literally an electrician, so this kind of stuff is my bread and butter. I figured it would be an easy fix, just a matter of rearranging some of the load on the breaker, which in all likelihood was downstairs. Times like those make me happy that I'm the type of guy who knows how to fix things. To be honest, I hadn't spent that much time in the basement since we moved in. I didn't really have a reason to. We'd looked it over briefly when the realtor showed us the place, but I didn't pay much attention. Come to think of it, I don't think I'd been in there one time since then. Anyway, I walked down the stairs and started looking around for the main breaker. The basement was pretty cluttered, and definitely not the type of space that could be easily used. It looked more like a storage room than a basement. Eventually, I figured out where the main was and started futzing around. After about 10 minutes, I realized where the load imbalance was and told myself I'd rewire it when I had more time. At that point, I was about to go upstairs when curiosity got the better of me. I figured since I was down in the basement already, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to have a look around. After all, this is my house, and it was honestly a little strange that I didn't know every square inch of it. Like I said, most of it was filled with old furniture and a bunch of junk. There wasn't anything particularly interesting down there, and I eventually concluded that trying to transform it into a usable space would be way too much of a hassle. That's when I noticed something odd. In the far corner of the basement, behind a stack of old wooden chairs, was a large metal door. It was strange because this wasn't just any door. It looked industrial grade. It was also a lot taller than most normal doors would be, and seemed pretty thick too. I walked over to it, and my suspicions were confirmed. It looked like the type of door you'd see securing a walk-in safe or some kind of panic room. My first thought was maybe it was a tornado shelter or storm room or something, but that would be a weird surprise. You'd think the realtor would have mentioned a feature like that. I tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. It was locked. I immediately went upstairs and started rummaging through the drawer of keys the previous owner had left behind in case we locked ourselves out or something, but none of them worked on the door. I must have tried like 15 keys or something, but no luck. I eventually told Taylor about it, and she was just as curious about it as I was. I'm still not sure how, but she worked her magic, and we were able to get in contact with the previous owners. It was that exact phone call that took me from curious about the situation to downright concerned. They were a little odd on the phone and would pause every so often, like they were thinking carefully about what they were saying or trying not to say too much. Part of me wishes I had recorded the conversation, but hindsight is 20/20. When I asked about the door, they got quiet. Eventually, the wife said it was just a safe room in case of a tornado. I told her that was great, but we were unable to use it since it was locked. After another pause, she claimed they'd lost the key and told us to just ignore it. I thought that was extremely unlikely, since they had literally left us keys to random doors that we'd probably never need to lock. The way she said it gave me a really bad feeling in my gut too, but there was nothing I could do. We ended up hanging up almost immediately after that, as they were definitely not trying to make small talk. Taylor tried to laugh it off, told me I was overthinking it, but I couldn't let it go. Over the course of the next few weeks, I would occasionally wander down the stairs and just stare at that door, wondering what could be inside. I tried everything I could think of to open it, even some tricks I'd picked up from work, but it was no use. The lock was solid. I ended up giving up for about a week, but the curiosity ultimately got the better of me. Fast forward to 2 days ago, when things took a wild turn. After my wife's wishes, I decided to hire a locksmith. He came over, and I let him do his thing down there. After about 30 minutes, I went downstairs to check on him. He told me that the lock was unusually complex for a simple panic room. Those were his exact words. I was worried he wouldn't be able to get it open, but to my surprise, he actually managed to crack it after another half hour. I wish he hadn't. Inside, the room was set up like some kind of shrine. There were old black and white photographs on the walls, all covered in strange symbols that I didn't recognize. In the center was a chair, just facing the wall. It looked like someone had spent a lot of time sitting there, just staring at nothing. In one corner, there was a cot with crumpled blankets, and it smelled stale and kind of gross. Then I noticed the trash. Empty chip bags, crumpled water bottles. The realization smacked me in the face. Someone had actually been staying down there, and not that long ago. I was dumbfounded. I didn't think the situation could get much worse, but of course, that's what happened. As I was trying to take it all in, I noticed a second door on the far right side of the room. It was small and half hidden by the minimal light, but it was there. I opened it and realized it led to a set of stairs that led to the cellar door outside the house. I felt like such an idiot. I hadn't even had the foresight to check the cellar door when we moved in, since I just assumed it led to the basement. In all the time we'd lived here, I had never even opened it. My bewilderment at the whole thing soon became terror. Someone had literally been living in my house for who knows how long. Things started clicking in my brain. Since moving in, my wife and I had noticed a few weird things that we couldn't explain. Most of the time it was just things going missing. Until that point, I had just assumed my wife had misplaced things, which she did have a tendency to do. This discovery changed everything though. Someone had been living in our house. I had to repeat that thought a dozen times in my head before I could fully wrap my mind around what was going on. I didn't know who had been in there or why, but I knew I didn't want them coming back. I tried calling the previous owners, demanding an explanation, maybe even threatening legal action, but they wouldn't pick up. Either they disconnected their number or they just didn't want to deal with it. Taylor was freaked out, and I was too. That night, I took some heavy furniture and barricaded the cellar door from the inside. I found a heavy-duty looking chain and padlocked it shut for good measure. I didn't care what it took. There was no way I was letting someone sneak back in through that door. The police came and took down a full report before leaving, telling us they'd do their best to try and get in contact with the previous owners. We even called our realtor, who was horrified and said she'd assist the police in any way she could. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, we heard it. There was a loud bang on the front door. Lola shot up, barking like crazy, and we both froze. Neither of us moved, just staring at each other, listening. After a few minutes, the banging stopped, but then we heard small rocks tapping against our bedroom window. Taylor held on to Lola, and I went to look out the window. Taylor begged me not to, but I was furious at that point. In my mind, I was preparing to fight whoever was out there. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed and yanked the curtains away from the window, but I couldn't see a thing. We thought it was over. Taylor wanted me to call the police, but there was a little part of me that wanted to handle this myself. I knew the police would scare them away and call it pettiness, but I wanted to make sure whoever was out there got caught. I told her if one more thing happened, I'd call. But then from downstairs, I heard the sound of glass shattering. I sprinted downstairs just in time to see two figures running away from the house. The kitchen window was completely shattered. It was then that I called the police, who showed up not long after. They searched the house and the basement, but there was no sign of forced entry into the storm room. They didn't find anyone on the property either. Their best guess was that whoever had been living down there was angry when they realized they were locked out and decided to come back and scare us. I was both furious and horrified. My wife has been a wreck ever since. The police escalated the situation since an actual crime happened and said they're working on tracking down the previous owners, but that it could take a few days. That was 2 full days ago, and we still have not been able to get in contact with them. I think the police scared away those squatters though, at least for now, as they haven't been back to our house since. I'm actually shocked that something like this could even happen in the first place. If we can't get in contact with the previous owners soon, I have absolutely no idea what I'm gonna do. I'm fully prepared to defend myself, but I hope it doesn't come to that. When I bought my first house, I was only 27. I'd saved up for years, and even though it was just a small, modest place, I was proud of it. Moving in, though, that took some adjustment. I'd lived with my parents my whole life, along with 3 siblings and 2 dogs. The house was loud, always buzzing with life. But this was quiet. Really quiet. That was honestly the hardest part about the transition. The lack of noise. Living alone felt strange, and at first, I wasn't sure I'd ever get used to it. I'm sure anyone who's gone from living with family to living alone knows what I'm talking about. One thing I loved about the house was the tiny balcony on the 2nd floor. Don't get the wrong impression. I don't even know if I can really even call it a balcony. It was barely big enough to stand on, and I couldn't even fit a chair out there. Regardless, I go out there most nights after work to take a break and clear my head. I smoked pretty often, but I hated the smell, so smoking inside wasn't an option for me. The balcony was twice as beneficial for that exact reason. I didn't even have to go outside or leave the comfort of my own home just to smoke. It felt like a luxury. I'll describe the layout of the property so what I'm about to tell you makes sense. The block I lived on was pretty standard, with houses adjacent to each other all the way down. The street behind mine was exactly the same, meaning everyone's house would be sharing a backyard if it weren't for the 10-foot tall fences designating the property lines. From my balcony, I could see over my backyard neighbor's fence and into his yard. You could see the whole place, really. After a few weeks, I realized I'd met almost all the neighbors except him. Come to think of it, I don't think I had ever seen him, let alone have a conversation with him. The guy never waved and never came over. I never saw him in the yard or at the bedroom window. Nothing. It was like he didn't exist. If it weren't for the occasional bedroom light on at night, I would have assumed the place was deserted. I guessed that there was an old person living there since the grass looked like it hadn't been cut in years, and I never heard any sounds from their yard. After another week, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to go introduce myself and at least put a face to the name. One Saturday, I walked around the block to his place, expecting to knock on the door and maybe make some small talk. But the house looked rough. Rough was an understatement. It looked completely untouched. The yard was a mess, overgrown with weeds, and the whole place looked like it had been ignored for years. The paint was chipping, some of the siding had been scratched off, and the walkway was stained. The doorbell was broken, so I gave a few loud knocks and waited. Nothing. I felt awkward standing there and started to wonder if maybe the place really was vacant. But then I saw a slight movement behind the window shade. Just a flicker, like someone was peeking out. That was enough for me. Someone was in there, spying on me, but wouldn't open the door for some reason. I turned to leave, when all of a sudden, the door flew open, slamming against the wall like someone had ripped it open in a violent rage. I jumped back, totally thrown off. I whipped around and found myself face to face with an elderly Asian woman standing in the doorway, staring at me. She was short, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her skin was wrinkled, but somehow tense, like she was flexing her face muscles, if that even makes sense. Her eyes were wide, unsettlingly wide. I can't even lie, I was pretty freaked out just looking at her. There was something off about her, like it looked like she was on something. She didn't say a word, just stared with no expression on her face. Eventually, I cleared my throat and introduced myself as her new neighbor. After a few seconds, she said her name was Priscilla and gave me a half smile. And that was it. She didn't even ask my name, she just stood there, watching me. I nodded and turned away, not knowing what to say. I left feeling more unnerved than I wanted to admit. I never heard the door close behind me, but I didn't want to turn around and get caught looking. Later that night, I went out to my balcony like usual, trying to forget about the strange interaction. At that point, I had no idea of the ordeal that I had just gotten myself into. When I glanced over the railing, there she was, that crazy-looking lady from earlier, standing dead center in her yard, looking straight up at my house. She didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there staring. It was one of those moments where you wonder if you're actually seeing what you think you're seeing. I didn't know if I should say something, wave, or pretend like I hadn't noticed her. It was one of the freakiest things I'd ever seen, and I didn't know how to handle it. I went back inside and told myself she was just a little messed up in the head, and that I shouldn't be getting worked up over a harmless old lady. But it didn't stop there. The following night, I saw her again, but this time, She was moving from one window to another inside her house, watching me from each one. Although I pretended not to notice her, part of me felt like she knew that I knew she was watching. I was hoping she'd stop, but she didn't. She was still looking at me when I finished smoking and turned to go inside. Out of curiosity, I peeked out one of my windows about 20 minutes later to see if she was still looking at my house. To my horror, she actually was. I called my dad, and he told me that she probably had dementia or something, and that she was most likely just lonely or confused. He told me that I should actually feel bad for her. It was kind of hard to feel bad for someone who was borderline stalking me, but my dad calmed my nerves and assured me that she was harmless. A few nights passed without anything weird happening. I didn't see her in her yard or at any of her windows. I thought maybe my dad had been right, and was starting to feel glad that I hadn't done something drastic. That is, until one morning, when I found a woman's sock on my side of the fence, just sitting in my yard. I stared at it, feeling a chill run through me. This wasn't just her strange behavior anymore. She'd been on my property. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to confront her, but I was starting to feel like I couldn't ignore it either. I should have called the police right there, but I didn't because I didn't want to create issues with a neighbor. That night, as I was laying in bed, the doorbell started ringing. Not once, not twice, at least a dozen times, one right after the other. I didn't even need to look. I knew it was her. In my tired haze, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was more annoyed than scared. I got up, threw on a shirt, and went to the door, telling myself I'd just ask her to leave me alone. I told myself that I'd been putting this off for long enough, and it was about time I dealt with it. I have no idea why I wasn't scared in that moment. I still look back and cringe at how flippantly I handled the situation. I don't even want to say I was naive, but I can't think of a better word to describe my attitude to it all. The second I opened the door, she lunged at me. She ran full speed at me with a kitchen knife in her hand, her face twisted in rage. She started screaming, yelling something about how I had taken her son from her. I barely had time to process what was happening. I grabbed her arm, managing to wrestle the knife out of her grip, and I pinned her down on the floor. She was easy to overpower, but that didn't make the situation any less terrifying. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking as I held her there and called the police. She was still screaming nonsense about her son and told me that she was going to kill me. At one point she tried to bite me, but I wasn't going to let her go until the police arrived. It was the longest 5 minutes of my life. She never stopped screaming or squirming the entire time. When the police finally arrived, they restrained her and forced her into one of their cruisers. She screamed the whole time, and I could still hear her screaming even after they shoved her in the car. I had never been more scared in my life. The police made sure I was okay and told me she'd be sent to some kind of psychiatric facility. I never saw her again after that. This incident still weighs pretty heavily on my mind and has definitely made me a more paranoid and cautious person. I ended up moving out not even a year later.